the recording of this video, we are 1 month away from our first grandchild, our baby granddaughter, being born. And my daughter-in-law requested that I do some paintings for the nursery, and her only real request is that elephants be in the picture because she's a fan of elephants. So this video is going to be a little bit about concept designing. Where does an idea come from? Now, this is a acrylic painting on canvas. So just to let you know the medium. And when a concept designer or an illustrator, when we come up with ideas, a lot of it is just procedural. It's not anything magical. It's taking an idea and running with it and being able to play and have fun mentally. Now, for this particular painting, I got to thinking about, okay, well, she wants an elephant in the picture. Well, what's the elephant doing? There are a bunch of different things she could be doing, but then I thought, oh, well, what if the elephant is fishing on the side of a river? And then I got to thinking, well, what else could she be fishing from? How about a pier, or how about from a tree? So I've got an elephant up in a tree fishing. Well, where do we go from there? Well, how about instead of a fish on the other end of the line, there's another animal hanging from the line? And what's that animal doing? Well, maybe another animal is hanging from that particular animal, maybe dangling from its tail. And so you begin to just allow the picture to begin to build on itself, thinking what character or what's going on in relation to what you've already established. And if you're trying to be funny, if you're trying to be humorous, it's actually quite challenging. Lots of people want to be funny and they're really not. And one of the reasons is that humor is as much a science as it is as much a science as it is an art. And so you have to think about these things and think about, well, what makes a scene funny? Normally, humor comes from odd juxtapositions. So you're expecting one thing to happen and something else happens. Now, if it's something that's scary, of course, then we go into drama or horror. But if it's something that is inherently funny, then that's where these things come from, is those odd juxtapositions that you're not expecting. It's not dramatic and it's not scary. Well, if it's not those other things, then it's probably going to be funny. We do have to remember that just because it's funny to you or just because you think it's clever, that doesn't necessarily mean everyone or actually anyone else would find it funny. So humor is something that you have to experiment with and bounce off of other people. So if you come up with an idea and you think, oh, this is so funny, well, try it out on someone else. And don't get upset if they don't get it. Because if they don't get it, it's one of two things. Either A, the humor is going over their head, it's not something they can relate to, which very often happens, because humor is related to one's upbringing. It's related to one's culture. What one culture finds funny, another does not. What one person, through their own personal experience, finds funny, maybe other people will not. So you have to sit down and consider, well, does that person come from a background that would even allow them to appreciate the humor? Then secondly, you have to be prepared that your idea is just not funny, that no human on this planet at any time in the history of mankind would ever think that that's funny. Now, you can take that personally. It can hurt your feelings. It can make you mad. But if you do, you're missing the point. The whole point of something like this is to entertain people. And if they're not entertained, it's not something that you want to sit back and get angry about, that, they're Neanderthals or Philistines, they just don't appreciate you. No, sit back and figure out, if you really want to be funny, if you really want to be clever and cute and have a good time, then figure out, well, A, am I funny? Is what I'm coming up with funny to people? But then also think about your audience and think about how they're going to react to whatever you're bringing to them. So there's a lot of work involved. Being humorous in your illustration is as challenging as any other part of the arts. I do lots of different kinds of art. I do editorial illustrations for magazines, and sometimes they're just straightforward, sometimes they're dramatic, and sometimes they want them to be humorous. Sometimes I actually do political cartooning. And the challenge in something like political cartooning is not only do you have to get your point across, but you have to be funny. And so when you're thinking about what you're doing, you have to try and be funny, not only to the people that agree with you, but also to the people who don't agree with you. The mark of a good political cartoon is going to be when someone who is diametrically opposed to your point of view still can see the humor in it. Now, if it's a very divisive issue, that can be problematic, but generally overall is, if you're really trying to be funny as well as make a statement, then hopefully you can find a way to say what you're trying to say without being offensive. And humor, right now, culturally, we're going through a time when people are really sensitive about everything, but then also so many boundaries have been broached that it's really hard to find people who are funny without being just vulgar, crude, and offensive. And so what I try to do is, when I'm doing something humorous, I try to find a way where anyone can enjoy it. Anyone, regardless of where they're from, regardless of their particular worldview, can still look and appreciate the work. Now, with something like this is a pretty soft, non-confrontational subject matter. Although you never know. There are people who are professionally offended. They wake up in the morning looking for a reason to be offended. So you just never know. But with a subject like this, it's safer than many of the things that I do for a living. And now I will say that the characters in this are highly simplified and highly stylized. And what's really interesting is, on the face of it, it would appear that highly simplified, highly stylized figures and characters would be far easier to do than highly detailed, anatomically accurate characters. And actually, nothing could be further from the truth. When you're stylizing characters like what I've done here, there are a few things you have to keep in mind. First is consistency of the concept. So all of the characters, the way they're designed, need to flow together and work together cohesively. So if you've got characters that generally overall everybody, if you'll notice with with these characters, their appendages, their arms, legs, whatever, tend to go to rounded points. So I don't have too many delineated features like fingers, toes, things like that. Now, that's not saying that there wouldn't be a character that would have that, but you do have to be careful that they're not all over the place so that they all relate and feel like they all come from the same world. And that's true of all of the features, the way their eyes are made, how big they are, how small they are, just everything about the characters. You also want to think in terms of proportion, details, colorization. If your palette needs to try and stay, again, consistent within that world, because remember, if you're creating an illustration, and especially if you're veering off from just straight reality, then you are building a world. And if you think about the difference between the way the characters are designed and the way the color palette is in Dr. Seuss and the Cat in the Hat, those books, think about the difference between that and what you see in Winnie the Pooh, or you see in Beatrix Potter's work. Arthur Rackham, the great 19th century illustrator, so much of his stuff is much more dark in its feel. So, just study the illustrators from the past and even ones contemporary, but look around and see how everything has a consistency. And the beauty of the consistency is that it will make your work, once you've got it established, it kind of gets easier to create the rest of the characters, create the rest of the world, because now you've got certain parameters. And what's interesting is rules, contrary to what most people think, rules do not make life more difficult. They actually make it simpler, makes it easier, because once rules are established, then you know where you can go and what you can do. And the challenge is, once those rules are made, staying within them. And if you begin to break your rules, be very, very careful, because what will happen is you run into visual and conceptual inconsistencies. And so your world begins to fall apart. It doesn't make sense. Let me give you an example in writing. In writing, you've got science fiction and you got fantasy. And the two are worlds apart. Science fiction, by its definition, it is fiction based, even if loosely, on science. So, for instance, in this world of Star Trek, there are no witches, there are no warlocks, there's no magic, there's no mythological creatures. If they are, then they're later explained as misunderstood species or something like that. So you're not allowed in science fiction to use any type of magic. You got to use, even if it's kind of outlandish science, it's still some sort of plausible science to explain what's going on in your world and what's going on with your characters. And again, that helps you because it keeps you from just going down all these rabbit holes that you can't resolve. And that works visually too, where if you're creating characters and you're going to have them interact with their world, well, they have to stay consistently anatomically with what you've created. I would encourage you to watch Angry Birds. Angry Birds is incredibly clever and interesting because they don't have any wings, they don't have any arms, they don't have any legs, and yet the creators created a world where even though you're watching this bird bouncing a ball with no arms, uh, cooking, uh, digging a hole with a shovel, doing all these things, and they don't have any appendages, but the way they've done it is so clever and believable that you don't break that. I think it's called the third wall, something like that. You know, in theater, when the characters are up on stage, you've got to create that third wall, that wall where you believe that you're in their world and you don't get all of a sudden realize, oh, wait a minute, these are actors on stage. So you got to maintain that. And that's what they do in Angry Birds. They maintain that third wall. So, yeah, for the most part, I've been talking about just concept and concept design because it's something that's really important to me. At this point in the video, you'll see that I'm using an X-Acto knife, cutting away the paint or cutting away the tape. And I will tell you, if you do that, just make sure you have an incredibly sharp X-Acto knife. The likelihood that you're going to cut your artwork with a super sharp knife is dramatically lower than if you use a dull one because you won't be using that much pressure. And you'll be very careful. And honestly, I don't really ever have many problems doing it. And then lastly, you'll see that I taped off around the illustrations and decided to do this sort of faux painting finish. And that was a lot of fun. I actually looked up and looked at a bunch of people doing faux painting online to get some ideas with sponge painting and everything. And so it really added a delightful modeled background. I sort of did it backwards. I wasn't realizing I was going to do that until later. It would have been better to have done the background and then just painted this on top of it. And then, of course, you can see that the tape didn't work like it was supposed to, so I wound up having to do some correcting anyway and go back and repaint where the paint had bled up under the tape, and then lastly having to reestablish the borders I had created. So, all right, well, I think I've rambled on enough. I'm going to finish that up. I hope you enjoy it. I hope my new grandbaby enjoys it. And I will be making posters of this and some other paintings in this series soon. So they'll be up on the website, on my website for sale real soon. So thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode of The Arthropologist, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see more episodes like this, think about subscribing. I'm Bill Wilson, and I'm The Arthropologist.